A basketball hero around here is treated like a god. I mean, how can you ever find out what he could really do? I don't want this to be the high point of his life. I've seen them, the real sad ones. They sit around the rest of their lives talking about the glory days when they were 17 years old.
You know, most people would kill to be treated like a god just for a few moments.
Remember, don't get stuck with another sticker company. Stick with StickerYeti.com for all of your sticker needs and much, much more. Sticker Yeti is the place for all of your needs when it comes to stickers. Check them out today.
Welcome to the Keeping the Nostalgia Live Show. I am your host, Billy Powell. With us today is, if I'm not mistaken, head coach at Manual High School for 24 years, Coach Fred Belser. Coach Belser, thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to help keep nostalgia alive and talk about this game of basketball.
Well, thanks, Billy. Appreciate it. Certainly glad to talk with you.
You know, I did not until, I went to Broderpool and I was kind of associated with the basketball program from 80 to 86. And, of course, you beat us quite a few times and we beat you guys quite a few times. But until I really kind of sat down and researched, I was raised for a few years of my life on 1210 Winfield, and I would have gone to Washington High School. And, of course, my Aunt Trinita, Uncle Fred, and my father and my other aunt went to Washington High School. I did not realize that you were a Washington Continental. Did you live in the Hallville area?
No, I lived out in what's called Eagledale, which was around 30th and Georgetown Road, just a little east of Speedway. And now that's the school district of Northwest High School, but Northwest High School didn't exist until I graduated from college.
So can you tell us when you were first introduced to the game of basketball? Were your mom and dad athletic, brothers and sisters? And tell us how you got involved in sports.
Well, it's real simple. My father was a sports nut. There was not a game of any kind that he didn't go to. So I was his little traveling companion. So I saw my first Indiana Final Four in 1948 when I was 7 years old. And I went every year after that for about 50 years. Quite a few of them with my father all the time he was alive. And he loved basketball and loved all sports and was a pretty good athlete himself, although he never had the opportunity to play any school sports. So that was it. We were raised on basketball. I have two younger brothers that were also involved in sports, but definitely was my father, no question.
And when you started going to those Final Fours, that was at Butler Fieldhouse at the time. It was not Hinkle Fieldhouse at the time, correct?
It sure was. And my dad seemed to know a ticket taker at about every event there was. So I was kind of snuck in and nobody was looking. And my seat in the Final Four, of course, Butler Fieldhouse at that time seated right under 15,000 people, and it was sold out. It was sold out year after year after year. And matter of fact, it was even sold out for the sectionals back then with a 16-team sectional. But my seat was on one of the big rafters that held up the ceiling. It kind of angled, so I would lay on the rafters, and that was my seat for several years. Actually, I don't think I actually had a ticket to go to the state finals till I was a coach at Manual.
Now, when you went as a young kid, and then, of course, later on, fast forward into your coaching career when you would take your Manual teams to the regionals at Hinkle Fieldhouse, did the memories come back to you when you would go and coach there by going there and watching games when you were a kid? Did it smell the same to you, and did it bring back those memories of going to those things with your dad?
Oh, yeah, yes. And for the first few years, my dad was able to be part of that, too. It was really a thrill to play at Hinkle Fieldhouse and be involved in that. And to me, that was probably the most exciting thing in basketball is the Final Four, or even when I was in high school, the sectionals were just tremendous. Sold out field house which each school had a little section that went from ground level straight up to the top of the field house, and they were all side by side for 16 schools, and everybody went to every game because you had to buy the ticket for the whole session. So it was not just great basketball, but it was also a great social event for high school kids. And I was just thrilled to be a part of that as a coach. I grew up idolizing all of the city schools. That was the era when Attucks won like 3 straight championships in 5 or 6 years, and was kind of a follower of Attucks and all of the city schools, as a matter of fact.
Did you have a basketball hoop at the house?
I did. I can remember begging my dad to have. We had one in the alley around the corner with, of course, a dirt floor. It's very rare to even find any outdoor courts that had cement back then. But I begged my dad, and he built a 12 by 12 cement thing, and I had a goal in the backyard, and we played there a little bit. I think I was probably maybe 9 or 10 then, and spent a lot of time out there. And luckily, in the neighborhood I grew up in, the local church had a gymnasium, and they started little pee-wee basketball at 8 years old, and so I was involved in that. And that was a tremendous neighborhood that I grew up in there.
And you played baseball also, right?
I played baseball in high school and played a couple of years in college. I thought I was going to be the starting shortstop going into my junior year, but they brought in a player who was so much better than me, who spent 10 years in professional baseball, that I switched to golf and played on the golf team my final 2 years of college.
During being a baseball fan, did your dad take you to Busch Stadium? Did you have a favorite team that you followed when you were a kid?
Yeah, actually, before I moved up to the Washington area, I lived in Riverside, which was real close to the what was then Victory Field on 16th Street. And I actually worked cleaning the bleachers there in the summers after ball games. So I got to see quite a bit of the Indians games, and even got to be on the ground crew for a short time.
I remember passing the old, what was Riverside Amusement Park and the Naval Armory. My grandfather would take me to about 20 or 25 games, but of course this was in the 70s and early 80s. But I love that ballpark. There's nothing like that baseball stadium to me.
No, it was great, tremendous. And that Naval Armory, they have a huge gym in there, and on Sundays there was kind of like nobody supervising it. So we could sneak in there and play basketball on Sunday afternoons, and I don't think anybody paid any attention to us. But that was one of the few indoor courts you could get to.
What kind of basketball tradition did Washington have before you got there, or just as you were arriving at Washington?
Well, it was. I wouldn't say there were a lot of championships involved. There were a couple of really good teams, and I know they'd won a sectional that when one of the great Indiana coaches, Bill Springer, was playing then. And I wouldn't say it was great until we got to the 60s, and of course I was long gone when I got there, and of course in the 60s they won state championships and in 1965 and again in 1969. So we were kind of like the precursor to that.
And what were your skills when you arrived at Washington High School as a freshman? And I'm assuming, did you play guard or you play forward?
Oh, I'm guard. I'm a little guy. When I was in the 8th grade, I thought I was going to be Mr. Basketball like every other basketball nut did at that age. And I thought the second best player on my grade school team would probably be number 2 on the Indiana All-Star team. Of course, reality quick hit me when I get to high school. But I was a point guard, and basically I think the only thing I really excelled at was seeing the floor. I had an ability to keep an eye on all 10 players at the same time and make sure the ball got in the right places. Luckily, I played with a great shooter in high school, and Eddie Williams, who was an Indiana All-Star. And then in college, I played with 2 small college All-Americans that were happy to get the ball in their hands a lot and shoot it.
At a young age, was that when you thought you may want to go into coaching, or was that later on once you got into college?
Oh, no, I think I probably wanted to be a coach all along. And where I grew up, you didn't know too many people that were college graduates that weren't teachers. So that was just a step to me that was pretty natural. Now my younger brothers became engineers and research scientists. So, but for me, it was probably always wanted to be a coach.
Coach, this past weekend was supposed to be the Indianapolis 500, and living pretty close to the track. Did you go to the 500 quite often?
Yeah, that's another place where I got snuck in at a young age too, because my dad, we would go to, back when they had 4 full days of qualifying, we would go to every game and every qualification round, and I think I saw my first 500 at 1949, and I think probably I finally stopped and gave my tickets to my children about 10 years ago, so I didn't miss any for quite a long time. And where I lived, it was right on the 4th turn of the track, so it was like walking distance. I just had to walk over and climb a fence, and I was there.
My dad, for quite a few years after he got divorced, lived 34th in Georgetown in the apartments there, and he was close to that 4th turn also, and you can always, hear everything, of course, every May.
Yeah, May was great in Indiana. The 500's a great condition, and it still is. It's just sad that it's not this year, but it'll be back.
Do you think that'll make a difference with it being in August, or you think it's just going to pick up where it was in August, if it still happens, hopefully?
Well, it's so closely associated with Memorial Day that I think we'll miss that association. But I think the pageantry will be the same. I think the crowds will be the same. It's just too big an event to lose any of its luster. I don't think it ever will.
Coach, who coached you in high school?
Dave Hine. Dave Hine was a tremendous fundamental coach, and I learned all the fundamentals that I use in my own playing and used in coaching from Dave. And he was Jerry Aller succeeded him, and of course Jerry's still a good friend of mine and tremendous coach.
Like I said at the beginning, it was interesting. My uncle was Fred Apshire. I don't know if you know any of the Apshires. And my aunt was Charnita, which is a very unusual name, Powell. And it was just very interesting to find your picture within their pictures. It was very nostalgic and very interesting to see that.
Yeah, Washington was a great neighborhood school. It was just the West Side school. And its alumni are highly supportive. It was a great place to go to school.
What choices or what opportunities did you have to go and play college athletics, and what made your choice for where you did go?
Well, actually, it was one of my teachers who was good friends of the basketball coach at what was then Indiana Central. And Angus Nickerson was a great college coach, and to be able to go there and play was a great opportunity for me.
And Angus that name rings a bell. Didn't he coach a lot of the Indiana All-Star basketball games for quite a while, right?
Yes, he did for several years, and I don't know when that stopped. I think then when he could no longer coach, I think they switched to high school coaches. But I think he was the coach of the All-Star team basically all the years I could remember.
And what was college athletics, college basketball like at Indiana Central compared to what it was in high school? Do you remember?
Yeah, we were a pretty good small college team. I think we were conference championships in my senior year, and it was Angus Nickerson coached the old Indiana basketball of run and shoot. We played fast, we played quick, and we're pretty darn good college team. I went to see them play once this year before the basketball season started, and they're now at Division II. We were small college NAIA when I played, and it always was a good basketball program, still is.
And did you go there? Did you major in? I think you majored in social sciences so that you could. You were a history teacher, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I think I was. I worked a little harder at my schoolwork than I did basketball. I think I knew my success had to be in the classroom. I was never going to be a basketball star, but I did start and was captain of a conference championship basketball team. But my job was basically to be a floor general, or I guess what they call today a glue guy. But my job was to keep the two big scorers we had happy.
You know, I didn't play athletics in college, but I'll tell you, my senior year in college, my head would spin on trying to figure out what in the hell I was going to do with my life with a history degree. And so was that the same way with you? Did you have an idea? Did you start early to prepare on what you were going to do and how you were going to get into the coaching field?
Oh, I had a plan, all right. When I was in high school, my high school economics teacher was going to law school part-time, and he would take me to law school classes with him. And so I probably spent a year of law school and going to those lectures, and finally got there. He would take off and go eat dinner, and I would stay there and take notes and give them to him. So my plan was to coach, get a coaching job in the epitome of high school coaching, which was a head coach in the city of Indianapolis. And of course, then my dream was I'm going to win a state championship and go finish law school. I never won the state championship, and I never finished law school. But that was my career choice, was to coach a few years and go finish up in law school. And instead, I stayed in teaching for 40 years.
You know, I will stop and say that, you know, I was the manager and trainer for Broderpool, and it's still really cool to be talking with you when, you know, I would watch you coach for Manual, being down on the end of the Broderpool bench and just watching your presence and stuff like that while you were at Manual. So, I mean, I know I'm getting a little starstruck and probably shouldn't be, but I think this is pretty neat.
You know, in those years you're talking about, 80 through 86, that was the peak of my coaching career. We had great teams in 1980 through 85. I think we averaged 18 wins a year for those 6 years. So, and of course, Indiana basketball at that time, or Indianapolis basketball at that time, was just tremendous. And it seems like every time I had a really, really good team, the city was just loaded with good teams.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You know, coaches like Eddie Ward, Bill Ritter, Coach Smith, Roger Schroeder, you know, you name it. And everybody I kind of talk to on this program, you know, whether it be in South Bend or Gary or whatever, when you're in that kind of an area, it's almost better to be a outside small town team because you're not beating each other up all the time.
Well, that was the league I wanted to be in, and I was extremely fortunate in getting a coaching job in the city of Indianapolis at such a young age. I was hired when I was 27, and then coached for 24 years. And during that time, I mean, there were just tremendous teams, tremendous players, tremendous coaches. It was a great league, and I had no desire to be any place else but coaching in the city of Indianapolis, because the competition was great every day. And of course, just a few of us made it out anywhere to go state finals. Washington a couple of times, and Attucks for several years, and of course, Broadville had great teams then. Arlington had great teams then. Howe was strong. All these teams were just would been tremendous teams any place in the state. But battling out in the city of Indianapolis, you could have a really good team, and nobody around the state even would know about it except people in the city of Indianapolis.
So what was it like after you graduated? What were some of your coaching stops before, like you said, at age 27, getting that head job at Manual?
Well, I was pretty lucky. An Indiana Central graduate, Woody McBride, who was a great player there, was hired to coach in Manual, and he had a really good team, and he hired me as the freshman coach. And believe it or not, freshman coach, you would think wouldn't be a big deal, but it was a job where there were over 100 applicants for that job, believe it or not, and because they were stepping stones. And Woody McBride coached for 3 years, and he was succeeded by Howard Dardine, who I think would have made a great coach, but he really didn't have a good team, and he just found out that coaching wasn't for him. And so he only stayed 1 year, and then I was lucky that year to win the junior varsity city championship. So I got promoted after 4 years at Manual to be the head coach. And I was pretty fortunate, and probably didn't expect to get there that early, but I was thrilled to do it.
What was it like getting a head job and then you having to fill the spots of a freshman coach and JV coach?
Well, I really had some tremendous assistants over all the years I coached. My first assistant when I got the head coaching job was Bill Rosenstiel, whose older brother, Jim Rosenstiel, was coach at Lebanon. And so he came in as my assistant, and I was lucky to get a great Franklin College basketball player as my first freshman coach. He was Clark Dickerson, who was a Washington graduate. And then later I had Steve Whitty, who I hired as my freshman coach. And, of course, he moved on and moved to a couple of schools and finally got the head coaching job at Ben Davis. And I told those people he'll win state championship there. And he won 2, as a matter of fact. So he was one of my assistants. Then one of my later assistants was Larry Bullington, who was played at Arlington High School and then went on to become a Ball State star. And he left and eventually became the head coach at Pike, where he won a state championship. So I never won a state championship, but 2 of my assistants did.
Coach, what was it like that first few years at Manual? Was there a lot of stress on winning at Manual, or was it kind of laid back?
I wouldn't say it was a lot of stress. I think any coach will tell you that there's no more stress than what you put on yourself. Yeah, I would say there was pressure, but it was only the pressure that you would expect at any place, and most of the pressure was just me trying to be successful, and we did pretty well. Had a great deal of success, won over 300 games, so.
And who?
I wouldn't call it fair. I got comfortable at Manual. I never wanted to leave.
Okay.
So I stayed there as head coach for 24 years and finished up my teaching career, and retired in 1999.
Who all was in your guys' sectional, and was it the same sectional your whole career?
No, I think it got moved around a couple times. They soon split up the big Indianapolis sectional, and Southport got a sectional. So we were in the Southport sectional most of the time. I was in coaching.
Now, while you were coach at Manual, how do you feel about, there were some good players in the city that were supposed to go to Manual, but went to parochial schools. What was your kind of take on that? You just rolled with the punches, or did you find that kind of difficult to swallow?
Yeah, I don't know that there were that many situations. I think one of my good players spent about 2 weeks at Cathedral and came back to Manual, and another one spent a week at Roncalli and came back to Manual. So I don't know that there were that many that did that I knew about anyway, and I think I knew them all.
What was Coach Schultz like, Ray Schultz?
He's a good guy. You couldn't ask for a better guy. Loved Manual, loved sports. His son played for me. Was a really good athlete and student, and Ray is still closely involved with Manual, and he was, of course, the head football coach when I was basketball coach. But actually, he would come over at football season and actually end up. I think we hired him as a trainer, but he was actually an assistant coach, and that was a great deal of fun.
Coach, did you know Gene Ring very well?
I knew him. He was coached against him several years, and I don't remember exactly how much it was, but we had a coach-to-coach relationship, just like you would with any other coach. But guys, help me out. Who was the baseball coach at Broad Ripple then?
Was that? Oh my gosh, Baird, Frank Baird.
Frank Baird, yes.
Yeah.
And he was the basketball coach at Broad Ripple at one time. And my dad said if Frank Baird were still coaching high school basketball, he said I would have been at Broad Ripple.
Wow.
Because he really respected Frank Baird. Frank Baird was still refereeing games when I was playing high school and college.
Yeah. I think he's one of the few people that are in all three Hall of Fames. I think baseball, basketball, and football in Indiana, I think.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
I didn't know that. Mainly he was a great guy.
Yeah.
He was just a great guy.
How did you feel going up against Coach Smith at Broad Ripple? How did you feel about his coaching techniques and the way he coached his team?
Well, I think he's an excellent coach. Kind of a hard-nosed guy. At least that's the impression I had. And he and I were actually kind of rivals in college too, because he's the same year in high school that I was, and then in college he went to Anderson, and Anderson was in the same conference with us. So I can remember playing against him in college. I can remember I always wanted to beat him, and I can remember it didn't happen that often. So I'd say he's a good coach.
Coach, I remember we did not want to play you guys in the finals of the 1983 regional finals. We thought you would handle Marshall easily, and I thought you guys would beat us, but we ended up having to play Marshall and winning, of course, going on getting our butts whipped by Steve Alford scoring 57 points.
Yeah, I remember.
Was that one of your... Is there a particular team that stands out that didn't fulfill its potential? And I know a coach is going to say every team didn't fulfill its potential, but did you feel like you had Was it 85? Was it 83? Or was it 80 where you thought you had your best shot to go?
I thought we had excellent chances in of all three of those years. But each of those years, there were other good teams. And I wouldn't have called Marshall beating us much of an upset. They were an awful good team who won a lot of games. And we didn't match up with them well. So we knew it was going to be a tough game for us. And it was a little disappointing because I don't think we played our best. We got in a little foul trouble, and that made us change to a smaller lineup. And against they had a pretty big team. So yeah, that was a disappointing loss for us. But Broadway was a good team that year. Marshall was a good team that year too. But I think there were 5 good teams then. 1983 and Arlington was a tremendous team. Cathedral was rated number 1 in the state twice that year. We played them early in the year, and they were rated number 1, and we beat them, and they were still rated number 1. So we drew them in the first round of the city tournament and beat them again. So I think that's when people realized that Manual was a pretty darn good team. And we had lost to Arlington, who I thought was probably a little better than us at the beginning of the year, but we got better, and then we played them in the finals of the city tournament and beat them and won the city championship that year.
Well, Jerome Brewer was a beast when he was at Arlington.
Yeah, and they had a good guard, and I can't remember his name. It was awfully good. Yeah, there was just Indiana basketball has always been tough.
Did you feel like
I don't know how many guys I don't know how many NBA players came out of Indianapolis, but a ton of them.
Yeah. Did you always feel like was every year as a basketball coach in the IPS public schools, was every year almost a rebuilding year, or did you get into a flow of, having that really competitive squad after you've had a couple years of your players melding together?
Well, it was, I would say it was a rebuilding process. It's kind of funny. People don't realize that the Indianapolis Public Schools then really didn't have basketball programs. All of the elementary schools, which were K through 8 back then, were strictly independent of the high schools, and so there wasn't anything we would call a feeder program at all. So our feeder program started in the 8th grade, in freshman year, and yes, we tried to build a program there, and I had some really good assistants to do that. But each year you almost became, each year became definitely a junior, senior laden team, and most of the times your good teams were senior laden. So after that, you were starting probably with 4 or 5 new players every year. And then when IPS went to junior highs, I think that made things even worse for the high school coaches because there were just fewer schools feeding in, and was a strange school district. So sometimes I would have maybe 10 or 12 kids that played on an 8th grade team, and a couple of years I had none. So it was like you didn't just build a program, you were building basketball players that probably hadn't played before.
All throughout your coaching career, you said you got comfortable and you really enjoyed being at Manual. Did you have opportunities to go other places, and you just remained loyal and stayed at Manual?
Yeah, I had a couple opportunities to do some college coaches, but basically what they wanted was somebody to recruit the Midwest or recruit Indiana. And, you would think about that and say, oh, well, college coaching, great, but what you were is a traveling salesman. That's what you were. You really didn't coach that much. You were an on-the-road recruiter, and I can remember some of the guys coming in to recruit my players, and sometimes they would just camp out in Indianapolis and stay there for weeks at a time. And so I thought maybe that's not what I wanted to do. I grew up in Indianapolis, stayed in Indianapolis, went to college in Indianapolis. I don't think there was ever any real desire to leave.
Was there a place, whether as a player or as a coach, that you really didn't like to play at or coach at?
Well, I hated that Broderville gym. But it was more like who were you going to play against rather than what gym it was. But didn't like there, and Howe was a hard gym to play in. But you were so familiar with them because you played them year after year after year that it really didn't make much difference where you played.
That Broderville gym was a Cracker Jack box, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, and some of the parochial schools, I didn't like going there. I didn't like playing at Cathedral or Roncalli. They were just way too small. I liked playing at Tech. I thought that was a great gym for basketball.
Coach, you were still coaching when did you kind of foresee that AAU may be a little bit trouble for high school basketball, or did you think it was going to be a big help for high school basketball?
I think Indiana's rules when most of my coaching career were a little too restrictive about summer basketball, and they then finally allowed some, like 2 players from a team could be AAU. But I think it was worse for us that the colleges turned more to recruiting through AAU than they did through the high school. And I think it was part of the rules of where college coaches could and couldn't visit. So it became much more convenient for them to kind of let the AAU schools consolidate some players and made it easier to recruit. But no, I did not like the AAU teams coming, and I think they became a little too big, and I think that kind of hurt high school basketball.
Coach, of course, you retired before it went down to this class system that we have. But what do you think about that decision, and how do you feel about that?
Well, of course, being from the city of Indianapolis, it wasn't like all the big schools were winning state championships every year. And I can understand the smaller schools' feelings on that. But to me, that was a tradition that I didn't think should change. The smaller schools, smaller classes, they get a chance to win a state championship. But back then, just sometimes beating the county seat was as good as winning a state championship. But no, I can tell you as a kid, I could name every Indiana All-Star player all through that time, and every state championship team, and who their starting 5 was. And after class basketball, I couldn't even remember who won last year in the 4 classes. So being from a big school, that was kind of like an end to a big tradition.
Coach, what was it like when I talk to people about hanging up their sneakers or hanging up their Spurs, but what was it? Was it a difficult decision to, hey, I've done my time, it's time for me to retire?
Yeah, I got pretty tired, and I knew it was time for me to stop, and I told everybody, 1992 was going to be my last year, and we won the sectional. And so my last team was a sectional championship team, and I can remember after we lost to Lawrence North in the regional, one of the sports writers said, "Well, you're hanging up." And I said, damn, I don't know. I just, you won a championship, and it's still exciting, but it only took me another day to realize that it was time for me to retire. I was tired. I don't think anybody else lasted besides Bill Ritter. I think we both coached 24 years, and I don't think anybody else has ever lasted as long as we did in the city of Indianapolis.
No, I totally agree that you were a foundation with Indianapolis basketball, of course, for 24 years.
I loved it. That was a great career for me.
What does Coach Belser do in his free time, and his what hobbies does he have? And do you still enjoy watching the game of basketball?
I haven't gone to many high school basketball games since I retired. Of course, the first thing I did when I retired is move to Arizona. I have kind of a lifelong dream of me to live out in Arizona. So we packed up and moved out to what they call an active adult thing. It was a neighborhood of 55 and older with a golf course. And of course, I love golf. So I moved out there, and my two brothers moved out in the same community. So we spent a lot of time in Arizona, hiking and playing golf. My wife, after retired, our ambition was to hike in all the national parks, and we almost made it, but we didn't get to all of them. But I wanted to play golf year-round too, so I still play golf 3 or 4 days a week. I can still shoot my age, and I did play golf in college, and I was all conference, but it was based on just one conference tournament is how they selected the all conference team. So I was kind of fortunate to play above my head that day. So that's what I do: hike and well, I've got 2 children and 2 stepchildren and 8 grandkids. So a couple of years ago, we moved back to Indianapolis because we have some grandkids in Boston and some in Orlando and some here in Indianapolis. So it kind of made it easier for us to visit them and them to visit us. But I have a good story to tell you about my first high school basketball game in Arizona, and you'll love this. The neighborhood school where we lived in just outside of Tucson was number 2 in southern Arizona, and they were getting ready to play the number 1 team. So I knew the gym was kind of small because I could see from the outside it wasn't a big gym. So I got there about 6:30 to make sure I got a seat. Number 1 and number 2 teams. And I think besides me and a couple of other people, there were only parents and teachers there, which just absolutely shocked me. And I watched the 2 teams play and realized that there was one player on the floor that could have made any one of my 24 teams, which was kind of crazy. Basketball wasn't big in Arizona, except at the University of Arizona, where it was big-time basketball. But I was talking to some of the people out there and some of the guys I played golf with, and I said, I played in front of a bigger crowd than has ever seen a Pac-12 college team play. And that's the truth. And I've coached in front of more fans than have ever been to a Pac-12 college game. And I think just a couple, 3 or 4 years ago, one of the Pac-12 teams built a 15,000-seat arena. But before then, none of them were as big as Butler Fieldhouse was when it was the original seating. I know they've reduced it quite a bit, but it was slightly under 15,000 back then, and I coached and played in front of that kind of crowd, which is pretty amazing. And of course, none of those guys believed it.
Yeah, what do they say in 49 states? It's just basketball, but in Indiana,
Yeah, there's nothing like it, and there's just no comparison to the way it was the supported. And back then, when I started coaching, I think it was much bigger than college basketball. Indiana basketball was bigger than college basketball. Now, I know we liked IU and Purdue back then, but it just didn't have the community support that high school basketball did.
And unfortunately, and I don't know if you agree with me, I don't think it's going to come back just because of the communication and TV and social media. I think it's had its run for now. I hate to say that.
Well, I don't think it's a community event. I think in some places in Indiana it's still a big community event, but I don't think the kids don't treat it as quite the special event that a basketball game was for the local school. I think it is a little different now. And I know it's that way for my grandkids. They would rather do something themselves than go be a spectator at what somebody else is doing. Right.
Coach Fred Belser, you said you weren't going to be able to make it for 45 minutes. We've been over 45 minutes. What do you think about that?
I'm surprised, but it's fun to talk about things that back then I don't get to revisit it very much. I kind of lost contact with a lot of the people here in Indianapolis when I moved out to Arizona, and so this has been fun. I will say though that the power of social media. I posted last week. I found a couple photos of you at Washington, number 33, right? Oh my goodness. Was the shirt too big for me? I was pretty skinny back then. I remember that. I liked it better when I wore number 3 in college.
But the power of social media, when I posted that I was going to interview you, it kind of went a little crazy, and people are really going to appreciate this and really enjoy listening to this.
Well, it's been fun for me.
So you've been listening to the Keeping the Nostalgia Live show. Coach Fred Belser, thank you for your time, and we thoroughly enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too, Bill.